Welcome to my series of basketball videos where I'll be comparing various NBA greats against each other. I'm doing this because I find that a lot of the basketball videos comparing players on YouTube are too focused on the big names, and sometimes compare players from different positions. For example, lots of people compare Jordan to LeBron and Kobe to Duncan, just because of their similar levels of achievements, but since those players play different positions and have different styles of play, it's not an interesting comparison. In this series, I want to do a comparison not between just more well-known players, but players from days past, in the 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, and even the ABA as well, that most modern fans probably do not have too much knowledge about. Also, as much as possible, I want to compare players that play similar positions and have similar play styles. To me, that's a more interesting and fruitful comparison. I'll be using 6 different metrics to compare each player. The first category is scoring. This category will be defined by each player's career points per game, peak points per game both in the regular season and playoffs, and number of scoring titles. Rebounding. This category will be defined by each player's career rebounds per game, peak rebounds per game both in the regular season and playoffs, and number of rebounding titles. Passing. This category will be defined by each player's career assists per game, peak assists per game both regular season and playoffs, and number of assist titles. Efficiency and advanced metrics. This category will be defined by each player's career true shooting percentage per and win shares per 48, both in the regular season and playoffs. The reason I use true shooting percentage is because it's more fair to guards. Field goal percentage tends to be biased to big men because of their height and play style closer to the basket. I also put in win shares per 48 here because it encompasses efficiency along with other attributes to give you an idea of how many wins a player contributes to his team. Defense. This category will be defined by each player's all defensive selections, defensive win shares, and defensive player of the year awards. The reason I'm not using blocks and steals in this comparison is because I want to compare the achievements of older players that modern fans might not have too much knowledge about, and players in the 1960s and early 1970s do not have steals and blocks tracked. Awards. This category will be defined by All-Star appearances, All-NBA selections, MVPs, Finals MVPs, and championships as the first, second, or third best player. The reason I have to only count championships as a top 3 player on the team is because otherwise you get into the situation where, for example, Robert Horry has 7 rings and Karl Malone has 0, and it's not representative of how much better a player is if they weren't a top 3 player on their team contributing to a championship. I know including All-Star selections is a little bit controversial because it's fan voted, but ultimately this is what the Hall of Fame uses in their criteria to induct a player, as unfair as it sounds. Also, I'll be including ABA stats and awards and using them as equivalent to their respective NBA stats and awards. The only one that's different about the ABA is that instead of Finals MVP, they have Playoffs MVP, which honestly is a better idea than Finals MVP since it accounts for the whole playoffs, but just to keep it simple, I'll be referring to the ABA Playoffs MVP as Finals MVP here. Also, no All-NBA third team selections are counted, because All-NBA third teams weren't added until the late 80s, which is unfair to older players. Also, I'm not using any career total stats because that's a longevity thing. For example, no one would say that Karl Malone was a better scorer than Michael Jordan, even though he has more total points. And of course, this is only going to be my opinion from comparing the available metrics, since I have not watched most of these players live, or even been born when some of these players have been playing. And to keep it fair, I'm judging them based on how they did in their own era. No time travel or what if this NBA player played in today's era or the 1960s, none of that. I'll be strictly basing their stats and accomplishments within their own era against that era's competition, which makes the most sense to me. So I hope you guys enjoy this comparison video and hopefully learn something new from it. The 10th episode in the series looks at 2 power forwards from the 1960s and 70s who played parts of their prime for small market teams before winning championships as members of the New York Knicks. Jerry Lucas was known as one of the greatest rebounders of all time, whose career was split between being a teammate of Oscar Robertson on the Cincinnati Royals and being the replacement for Willis Reed on the New York Knicks, while Dave Debusschere was known as the tenacious defender and rebounder of the Detroit Pistons before playing the rest of his career on the New York Knicks as well. Both were highly regarded as 2 of the greatest power forwards of their era and both ended up playing for the same team. Who had the greater career? Let's find out. In the scoring category, it's pretty close, as Lucas averaged just 1 point per game more than Debusschere did. Neither players were primary scoring options. That was handled by their teammates Oscar Robertson for Jerry Lucas and Dave Bing for Dave Debusschere. And when both of them played for the Knicks, they deferred to Walt Frazier and Willis Reed as the primary scoring threats. Still, both could get their team the points if they needed it. Jerry Lucas averaged 17 points per game for his career, peaking at 21.5 points per game in 1966 and 1968. But his playoffs points per game takes a steep drop to 12.4 points per game, mostly due to the fact that he shared his position with Willis Reed later in his career. But he still peaked at 23.3 points per game in 1965, back when he was a secondary scoring option. Debusschere averaged 16.1 points per game for his career, peaking at 18.2 points per game in 1967. Unlike Lucas, Debusschere was a consistent starter in the Knicks lineup and averaged 16 points per game for the playoffs, peaking at 20 points per game in 1963. This one is quite close, as Lucas was the better scorer when they were at their peaks, but his scoring dropped off with the Knicks as he was asked to step back and come off the bench, and he had to sacrifice his numbers to be part of the team. So his scoring drop-off is totally understandable. Both players had an outside shot, but Lucas was more efficient at it. So due to his higher peak scoring prowess and higher efficiency, I'll give this category to Jerry Lucas. When it comes to rebounding, both of these players were incredible rebounders. Debusschere was known for his ferocious and tenacious defense, and part of that was his rebounding as well. Debusschere averaged 11 rebounds per game, peaking at 13.5 per game in 1968, and 12 rebounds per game in the playoffs, peaking at 16.2 rebounds per game in 1968. So while Debusschere was a great rebounder, Jerry Lucas was also one of the greatest rebounders of all time. He averaged a ridiculous 15.6 rebounds per game for his career, peaking at an insane 21.1 rebounds per game in 1966. He's one of only 4 players to ever average over 20 rebounds per game for a season, the other 3 being Bill Russell, Wilt Chamberlain, and Nate Thurmond. It's noteworthy that Lucas was easily the least athletic out of these 4, by the way, and still managed somehow to grab this many rebounds. His rebounding average is 4th all-time and trails only Wilt Chamberlain, Bill Russell, and Bob Pettit. His playoffs rebounds per game takes a steep drop to 10 rebounds per game, but that's again because he was asked to play less minutes later in his career. He still peaked at 21 rebounds per game in the 1965 playoffs. Some have accused Lucas of padding his rebounds, but his nickname was the computer due to his mathematical prowess, so he had an ability to calculate the trajectory and timing the ball in a way few others could. So while Debusschere was a great rebounder, this category has to go to Jerry Lucas. In the passing category, it's again very close, with Lucas averaging 3.3 assists per game for his career, peaking at 4.5 a game in 1973, and 3 assists per game in the playoffs, peaking at 5.3 a game in 1972. And Debusschere averaging 2.9 assists per game for his career, peaking at 3.6 a game in 1972 and 1974, and 2.6 a game in the playoffs, peaking at 3.4 assists a game in 1973. It's notable that both players peaked in assists per game when they were playing for the Knicks, which is a testament to how unselfish that team was. Now this is again close, but Lucas had the better average and the better peaks, so this category will go to him as well. In the efficiency and advanced metrics category, it's also a clear win for Jerry Lucas here. Both Debusschere and Lucas were great outside shooters for their size and for their era, and pioneering stretch bigs, but Lucas was clearly the more efficient shooter. The advanced metrics back this up, with Lucas beating Debusschere in true shooting percentage per and win shares per 48 by good margins. So this category also goes to Lucas. In the defense category, it's where Dave Debusschere gets his first win. Lucas was an alright defender, but Debusschere was known as one of the most tenacious defenders of his era, with 6 all-defensive selections. Now keep in mind that Debusschere could have easily had 10 or more all-defensive selections, as all-defensive was not an award until halfway throughout his career. Debusschere's defensive attributes was a huge part in the New York Knicks' success in the 1970s, and along with Walt Frazier, anchored the defense of that team. So this category goes to Debusschere. In the awards category, it's pretty close because both players ended up playing and winning championships for the same team. Debusschere has 1 more All-Star appearance, but Lucas has 4 more All-NBA selections, including 3 first-team selections, whereas Debusschere didn't even have any first-team selections. However, on the other hand, Debusschere has more championships, and in both championships he could be considered the 3rd best player on the team after Frazier and Reed. Lucas's sole championship was when he came off the bench and substituted for Reed, so Debusschere definitely had more contributions in his championships. I'll have to end up calling this a tie due to Debusschere's advantage in championships and Lucas's lead in All-NBA selections. So when all the categories are summed up, Lucas owns most of the categories, including all the stat-related ones, scoring, rebounding, passing, and efficiency, while Debusschere takes the defense category and the awards category remains a tie. While this might have seemed like a lopsided win for Jerry Lucas, an argument could be made that while Lucas had all the tangibles, Dave Debusschere had more intangibles, and it was his toughness and intense defense on the court that really spurred the New York Knicks dynasty in the 1970s, so it was still a very close comparison between 2 all-time forwards. Jerry Lucas was an incredible rebounder and outside shooter for his era, while Dave Debusschere's intense defensive style formed a key part of the New York Knicks dynasty, guarding everyone from Billy Cunningham to Gus Johnson. Both players were pioneering stretch bigs, but remain more or less forgotten today, except amongst old-school fans and New York Knicks fans. hope you guys enjoyed this comparison. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe, and stay tuned for the next comparison video.